Paul, nice to meet you and welcome to Lux and Tech.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you too, Carlo.
We are here today to discuss your latest book titled Connecting with Clients, in which you put a lot of research work and your experience, both as a top executive and entrepreneur in the fields of marketing and advertisement agency, and also a psychotherapist. And before we delve into the content of the book, would you like to say a few words about yourself to give our audience the opportunity to get to know you more?
Oh, if I tell them all about me, they may not want to get to know about me too much. I guess the shortest thing I could say was, look, I flunked out of school without any qualifications, really. And I made my way in business. And I largely learnt about things by failure. And failure is such a great way to learn how to do something. And we just on that one little topic, if we watch little children reaching for their sucky cup, we'll see them reaching out and missing until they get it right. And so I learned, again, what I should have learned when I was a little tiddler, that by experience you can learn. And I've made my way through advertising and eventually ran my own advertising agency. And I got really fascinated by what makes people do the things they do. How is it that whole groups of high functioning individuals, by that I mean people that can hold down jobs and relationships, how is it that on a Monday morning they can come together and collude unconsciously to make the worst of each other? Wow, that became more fascinating than actually the advertising that we were producing. And then I was also really intrigued by, what was happening with me and my teams. Why was it that, for one client, we couldn't be bothered to get off our bar stools, but for another client, we go through absolute hell and work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I became really fascinated by those different questions and why was that? Why was that happening? And I realized I became more interested in the psychology, what goes on between people, than I was in the world of ads and creating ads. So I left and I studied organizational change and the psychology of organizational change. And I became a change agent. And, that led me on to really thinking about individuals and wanting to work more deeply with individuals to understand them better and also to support them better. And that led in turn to me putting those two together with my past experience and then helping agencies and clients, so large and small organizations, to do better with their relationships. So that's a bit about me. And these days I define myself as a relationship specialist. Whether my wife would define me as that, I never really know, but we'll have to ask her. But she too is a psychotherapist.
Wow, two psychotherapists in the house. It must be interesting.
Well, it makes arguments quite elegant.
As I was reading your book, I often ask myself, because I saw both aspects of your experience, the academic and scientific one, and the hands-on experience. And I ask myself, have you ever found yourself, while writing, in a situation where you would say, yes, but here experience overcomes science, what we theoretically know about human beings and how they function, but in reality, it's not that predictable, so to speak?
Well, I think human beings none of us are predictable. And one of the amazing things about the human being is that not only are we all optimists, and we're sort of deluded with that, which is fantastic, but also many of us believe we know what's going on for the other person. That in the same situation, that, if we were to face that particular position, we would feel like that. And we kind of project onto them our own feelings. That's not actually necessarily the truth. And I think that's where reality really cuts in, that the real life is often way more complex and individuals are way more complex than we would read about necessarily. So I use thinking and theories as a map, but the map isn't the territory. And I think that's really important. The individual is way more important than how they think. And one of the fascinating things for me, which I'm really, is often very moving with individuals, is that when you know their background, when you can really step into their shoes, life becomes their actions become so much more understandable. so much clearer. But that takes understanding and it takes openness. And I think, applying that in the commercial world, I really need to step away from my own fixed beliefs and really stay open to the client and what the client is really thinking and feeling. And so in working with clients, and I'm not talking as a psychotherapy clients here, but about business clients, it's really stepping into their shoes, really getting diagnostic about what's going on for them, either individually or collectively within their organization. What is the context? That gives me a much better idea about how to work with them and how to manage the relationship really effectively.
What is the context? Sometimes we are too blind to understand the counterparty's context, as focused as we are in our own context.
Well, that's true. And I think that's, that we grip our own reality very tightly,
Yeah.
Because that is the one in an uncertain world that we are certain of. And that helps us to stay stable, from an egoic point of view. We know who we are. And that is one of the issues, because as we hold that tightly, it becomes really difficult then to open our minds to somebody else's thinking, somebody else's approach. That's a real challenge, but we have to loosen the grip of our thinking on ourselves and just pause, and there is that pause in a breath and just stop and then allow the other person to emerge and to open ourselves to the possibility that there's a different way of thinking, a different way of believing, a different way of acting, and that theirs to them is absolutely sensible, and ours just as ours is to us. And I think allowing those points of view, that allows for communication. Whenever I hear anybody shouting at each other, I always think, well, I can't hear you because I'm standing that close. Actually, if you just whispered, I'd probably hear you a lot easier. And so softening our reactivity, softening ourselves down and opening to the other person, the other company, the other team, I think is the fundamental for any effective interaction.
Wow, if you shout, I can't hear you, but if you whisper, I
Yeah,
can hear you better. I love it.
yeah. And
I,
it is true,
In fact,
uh,
I wouldn't want to oversimplify the message of your book, and certainly we have time to discuss it in details. But in it, I realize that the emphasis goes on the fact that the relationship is as important, if not more important than the output. So what the advertising agency, in your case, or other businesses provide as, as an output to their clients is certainly very important, but so is the relationship. And that's why listening is one of the first elements you dig into in the book and you keep addressing throughout the pages.
yeah. And that is, you're right, it is the message of the book. In any professional services relationship, actually in any relationship, there are two problems. There's problem A and problem B.
Yeah.
Problem A is the task at hand, and it doesn't matter whether you work in banking, in luxury goods, in finance, in retail, there's always going to be a task at hand, which is about the product service, the delivery, the meeting of particular brief requirements, whatever it is that your business does. Even in psychotherapy, actually, that can be true as well. Somebody's here to create change or whatever in their life. That's problem A. And problem B is really our experience or the client's experience of the relationship. And so problem A sits at the top, and we spend 99.9% of our time struggling at problem A. And in the advertising business, there's a truism that says agencies get hired for the work and fired for the relationship. And that is also true in many other businesses, that problem B, the relationship, is what causes the problem. And of course, if I think about you as or anybody as a great advisor or a great banker or a great legal counsel or a great builder, whatever it is, but the relationship is not there. If I don't trust you, if I don't feel you've got my back, if I don't really think you care about my business or about me, then my experience of how you solve problem A is always going to be mediated by that problem. So if I don't feel positively about you, if I don't feel positive about the service or our relationship, then I will think really badly when things go wrong about you. There it goes again. Of course, I always anticipated it was going to go wrong. But if I feel positively about you, then I'm going to be way more forgiving. Well, it could happen to anybody. And, we'll ride this through together. Negatively, no, it's terrible. I'm not losing you again. So, I'm really conscious that where I am today, we have some workmen in the building. Now, there are two key suppliers in this little village I'm living in at the moment during lockdown, or hopefully the end of lockdown. And I really like the guy that comes and has organized our building. And I trust him. I really trust him with good advice. His work is good. But you know what? He always fails to communicate effectively with me, despite the fact I've talked to him about this. He is never communicating with me effectively. So I'm left in the dark. I'm concerned. I feel, uncertain about what's going on. It means I get reactive. I get irritable. And guess what? Now I'm locked down in the village. I'm thinking, well, I can control all this stuff myself. I'll just call in the independent contractors. But actually that guy is a very good builder, but his relationship skills are zero.
That resonates a lot with me, Paul, because, well, building relationships and listening to people is what I do focus on in my professional life. However, I come with a different background, and life exposed me to a different problem. The culture I come from, the Italian culture, is very much based on relationships. So you mentioned the fact that agencies get hired for the work and fired for the relationship. Traditionally, in my home country, and also in the country that I chose to live in, Dubai, which has an Arab culture, it's the other way around. People get hired for the relationship and perhaps fired for the relationship. So how shall we cope with that?
Well, I think there are differences by market. Let's be really clear about this. There are cultural overlays about this. But what I would say is uniformly, the relationship counts. You cannot ignore it. Even in some parts of Asia and China, for example, where relationships can be quite brutal, even so, right there, it is absolutely about the relationship. And if you mess up, that's it, you're out. And so if we think about whatever work or whatever our business, whatever our focus of attention, if we spend, and even personal relationships, instead of thinking about what we've got to do today, we think about also the relationship, maybe for 10% every day, it will transform any relationship. And you mentioned listening, and listening is the start point. Most of us think we can listen, because that's what we do when we grow up. We listen to our parents or our guardians, and we listen to people around us and our mates, but actually much of the time we're not really deeply listening. We're listening to the voice in our head. We're listening for an opportunity to get into the conversation, or we're thinking about what to say. We're not focused on the other person. And it takes a lot of skill. I didn't realize, I thought I was a great listener. I thought I was a great communicator working in agencies, where the whole thing is about communicating with clients, right? And our teams. It was only when I trained to be a psychotherapist that I realized I really did not listen that well. And it was shocking. It was a real blow to be able to be taught how to listen. And it was a long and arduous process, and one that never stops.
I agree with you. And I see it in action with my kids. Every time I can free my mind, which doesn't happen as often as I wish, but every time I can free my mind and listen to them deeply, completely, with my full concentration and intention, I see changes every time. Now, for the benefits of our audience, Paul, what does it take? What can they do to improve their listening skills? Small steps, baby steps they can take on a daily basis.
Well, that's really interesting. Nobody's actually asked me that before, Carl. And I think it's a really good question. The cheap answer would be buy my book, but actually, I don't want people to rush off and buy my book just because of listening. I really don't. There are other books. There are books on listening. But what I would say on a daily basis is to pause and still the mind, and practice reprising what somebody has just said. In other words, just to paraphrase, what I heard you say was, is that right? Now, it might seem slightly odd, by the way, I'm not saying you should do this with your partner at breakfast. Oh, you like jam on your toast, is that right? Or whatever it is. But really repeating back, just so you get, and getting people to really help identify what might have been missing from your understanding. And if you're in a business meeting or in a complex conversation, summing up and paraphrasing is a really good way of then getting a grasp on what's just been said and also locking it into your mind. And now you've got a really clear understanding of the other person's world and what they're thinking. I think that is the most important thing. The next most important thing would be to listen for what's not being said in a relationship, and particularly a business relationship. Maybe you're in a meeting with a client and there are different aspects. Part of listening is encouraging the other person to speak and being curious about their world and asking them when they pause about a particular issue they haven't mentioned. The use of silence is fantastic. Ask a question and be silent. That helps the speaker, the other person, to be able to really engage with what's going on about a particular topic. And it gives you as the listener an opportunity just to pause and still your own mind. It is a lot about mind control. So, but I think those would be a couple of practical steps. It's always good to have a couple of practical steps.
Absolutely. And before we move to the next subject, there's a mistake you highlight in the book that many people, certainly I make on a regular basis, that of what you define already listen. When I read this, I said, my bad.
Yeah.
Although I proud myself on trying hard to listen to my clients and colleagues and people I deal with, but this is one of those mistakes I keep making.
Yeah, well, I think we all do, Carlo. I think we can all be forgiving of ourselves. That's the other thing. Be compassionate about our own errors. That helps alert us to them,
So for our audience, would you like to explain what already listen is?
Okay, so already listening. It's often evidenced most easily in couples that really know each other well and kind of have a dance with each other. Maybe the wife is complaining or the one partner is complaining about something and the other partner just tunes out. And you, as a couples therapist, I've seen this happen. I've listened to it happen, rather, on a number of occasions. And you think, you just realize that one party is not listening to the other party anymore. You have to stop them and say, well, what's going on for you? And inevitably the partner says, I've heard it all before. And that's exactly the same thing that happens in any type of business with a client that you know well. And particularly if they are complaining or criticizing, it's quite often that the other party, the supplier or the advisor party, will tune out unconsciously. Yes, I've heard this before. And it almost becomes uncomfortable at some unconscious level or out of awareness level to listen to that again. Now, the problem is that means we've detached from the client or we've detached from our partner. We're no longer listening. And they can really experience that in a very out of awareness way when we're face to face. It's a bit more difficult in virtual reality as we are these days. But nevertheless, what it stops us doing is hearing it again as if for the first time. And it loses the emotional content. So we no longer respond to the true emotional content or the true complaint and the extent of the complaint or the issue being raised. And we miss it. And the other thing we miss is any new news that is within that complaint overall. Some subtlety that might be very important to the other person. So already listening is a way of just tuning out. And we can see this evidenced in teams when a client, for example, will start on a familiar complaint and clearly it hasn't been addressed. But the supplier team or the agency team, if it's in an ad agency, kind of just hunch their shoulders, check their notes, kind of look down, look away, and you see the physical signs, the body sort of slump slightly. And they have actually gone. They are no longer in that meeting. They've gone on holiday, or they've gone to the next meeting, or they've gone to something else on the agenda, but their mind is no longer focused on that client. Sometimes I call it going to Waikiki. They've just gone, They're going to sit on the beach for a couple of seconds while that client complains, but they're
That's so
not
true.
listening,
Yeah.
and it's already listening. And so catching ourselves, and we do that in families too. Yeah.
Very often, I would say.
Very often.
And as you
Yeah, by the way,
mentioned,
on that one subject, watch any husband. He's just nodding to his wife is chatting
you
away.
told me that. Yes, you keep saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But that makes so much sense to me. You are losing the emotional content. You may have heard the superficial content already, but you're losing the contextual emotional content.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you lose connection with the other person or the other people. And at that point, you become separated again, and it becomes them and us, or her and him, or him and him, her and her. It's a separation. You're no longer in that connection. And that means that communication and rapport deteriorate and, are just absent. And that then becomes a sort of mini rupture, it's a mini pause in that relationship. Whereas actually there's an opportunity, particularly between suppliers and clients, or advisors and clients, it's an opportunity to stay close and to strengthen that relationship by really stepping into that, I've heard this before. And going further, it stops then the inquiry, the curiosity about, now it's interesting, you've raised this before, and it stops then saying, I'm really interested. Clearly, there's something important about this to you which we've missed. That line of inquiry is now closed. But that line of inquiry about, well, why is this client saying this again? What haven't we surfaced in the past? What can we get out of this particular complaint or reiteration of an issue again? What is it that the client perceives that we're missing about this? And so already listening is not just missing that connection, it's missing an opportunity to resolve something that is underlying there.
I can really see that. And I can also see, and correct me if I'm wrong, how this creates the basis for what you define in the book clean language.
Carlos, you make a very good connection there. So clean language is an interesting concept and a powerful one. It's associated also with the use of metaphor. I'm going to put that to one side, the metaphor, and just think about clean language. When we talk about issues to somebody else, what's in our minds will be a particular framework of understanding. For somebody else, it will be totally different. So if we use things like blue sky thinking, innovation, out of the box, or staid, stable, or smooth, calm, all of these words have a particular set of meanings to us individually. Now, normally in everyday language, we don't bother to work out, well, are we meaning the same thing when we say innovation, blue sky thinking, or something totally different? And so clean language is a way of removing these preconceptions, our own individual preconceptions. And so if a client is talking to me about a particular issue, and this is where sort of reprising or going back and just confirming what somebody said is a valuable sort of stepping stone as a tool. If somebody says, I really like to, break through in terms of some particular problems here, I will reprise back and say, when you're talking about breakthrough, what is breakthrough to you? Now, I'm going to get a very defined meaning of breakthrough, whereas before I was just running on automatic for what's my defined version of breakthrough. So breakthrough in relationships might be, for example, I can't manage to have effective social relationships. I would like what is breakthrough to you? Well, breakthrough might be that I could go into a room of people and have a 10-minute conversation with somebody I don't know, for example. Now, I wouldn't have got to that unless I'd actually specified the question, what is breakthrough to you? And now I can work on, well, a bit more definition about what's going on. In business in particular, that is really, really important. So in the book I talk about, in particular, but all the examples are true. They're taken from real life. A client that wants to own Christmas. And, if the agency pursue well, what does own look like? Because everybody wants to own Christmas, but who, it's ridiculous. You can walk off and say, okay, so for a marketing brief, own Christmas. I mean, how much money do you have to own Christmas? With all the Christmas advertising, could be anything. So with using that as an example, so when you own Christmas, what is owning Christmas? And then the client can be gradually helped towards themselves actually defining what ownership means. And ownership for a particular coffee chain really meant stopping by for a cup of coffee when you're shopping, but it took a lot of going down from ownership and what that would be like. So clean language is really about defining meanings.
Defining meanings through thoughtful questions, I guess.
Through just using the client's language. That's the most important thing. So if somebody says own Christmas, well, what is owning? When is owning, and where is owning? When is owning? And now we can begin to define owning. But if the client says a different word, you pursue that particular different word or phrase. And it's important you just use their words. We ran a workshop on clean language in the business, and I thought, well, initially I thought, well, this is the use is really limited to this. And we had a mixed group of people from our office, consultants and people, admin people, and our IT people. And some of the guys went out to the bar in North London that evening. And they went to the bar and they spoke only using clean language, and they got into some very deep conversations with some young women. So it obviously proves it can be really effective in personal relationships.
There's always an upside to anything. Now, I made a note here as when I was reading your book, and I think it could relate to many other businesses. When you say that 99% of client-facing individuals in the advertisement industries always want to appear confident and knowledgeable, whereas pursuing that look is dumb.
Yeah. And this is true not just in advertising. This is
pretty much
any business, everywhere. Yeah. You don't want to look like a failure. I mean, you don't want to look like an idiot. You want to come over to your boss and to clients and everybody else as, confident, effective, whatever your stuff is, whatever.
And my industry, the luxury industry, perhaps adds weight on it.
Yeah, and maybe you want to be seen to be really elegant, but slick, or whatever the expression is, knowledgeable, experienced, good advisors, so that you really come over as knowing the look of the land. And the problem really is that in doing so, what happens is that we tend to put this mask on, and we begin to bullshit, in effect, to begin to slightly manufacture how we come across, to act in a particularly confident way. Whereas, again, I've observed this happening in teams, where teams will, or individuals within a team will want to be seen to be really confident and assert a particular point of view or a resolve to a problem really quickly. And you just get the feeling, well, does this guy really know what he's talking about? There's a kind of overconfidence and there's an over-enthusiasm. And that can communicate itself really easily to clients that, actually there's something not quite right here. And, the bullshit factor really does become clear. It's sort of, it's evident in the over speedy response. Now, what the impact for clients is that if somebody comes over and says, yeah, well, we can fix that and we'll do it in a day and blah, blah, blah. If it's too quick, if it lacks the gravitas, then somehow I don't believe it. Somehow I'm a little less sure. And of course, the problem is systemically that solve that actually is put in place, or the advice that's given, is probably not as robust as it should be. And I've worked in organizations as an external consultant where what happens is the workload goes up because somebody is just not that grounded. They are overconfident, or they come over as overconfident, but they absolutely do not know their stuff. And so they make promises that aren't delivered, and then they need to put it right. And there's this desperate need to come over as we know our stuff. Actually, it's better when, much better, if somebody says to me, you know what, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to check it out. Wow. Now I really trust that person. Now there's somebody that's talking in a grounded way about an issue, or will say, no, we do know that this is correct. And we'll say so from a point of a real sort of grounded adult to adult position. This is what will happen, rather than an over enthusiastic, over elaborate response.
That sounds great. So we are trading here confidence with, I don't know, thoughtfulness, brilliance with reliability in a way.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is that if you're going to act in the interests of a client, whatever business you're in, you do so from a point of view of real thoughtfulness and groundedness so that you demonstrate your care. Now, you can build on top of that enthusiasm.
Yeah.
But when it comes to that point where you don't know the answer, it's better to say, I don't know the answer. Or you raise some interesting points here, Mr. Client, or Ms. Client, we'll come back to you. And it's a bit like there's another issue when you know, if you do deal with a client's complaints about a relationship or a service issue, you know, if you respond in the moment and say, you know, okay, I know exactly what to do to solve that, somehow it can be almost irritating. Well, if you knew that in the moment, why didn't you do it in the first place? Kind of, you know. But if somebody I've complained to says, hey, Paul, you know what, you've raised some really good issues here. I'm going to think about this. I've got some ideas, but I want to check. I want to reflect on them. I want to talk to the team about them. I will come back to you within a day, an hour, a week. Give this some real chewing over, and I'll respond to you then. Now I'm really going to believe that person. I'm going to think, wow, they've really taken this on board. This is really important. So it demonstrates way more care, way more thoughtfulness, and I'm way more likely to believe that something positive will change of significance as a consequence. Much more powerful.
Much more powerful. Since you mentioned group dynamics before, I found extremely interesting your explanation of the Jahari window, which is a methodology to understand oneself and others within a group. Would you like to elaborate on this?
The Jahari window is the name comes from Joe and Harry, by the way. It sounds like a rather esoteric sort of religion, Jahari window. But the guys that first came up with the idea drew a quadrant and it looked like a window. So it became the Jahari window. And there are 4 sort of quadrants here. And you know, we can think about quadrant 1 as what's known to myself and what I allow everybody else to see, you know, in public, and that often is, you know, a substantial size of the window. But of course there's another aspect, which is what I know about myself, but I'm keeping secret from you. All those bits of shame or stuff I don't want you to know about, or inadequacies are all there. I think that is, you know, a significant aspect in interpersonal and in all relationships, that, you know, that bit I don't want you to know about. I want to put that face out there, that successful face that we were just talking about, rather than the authentic me. And then of course there's another bit, which is another quadrant, which is, importantly, what do you know about me that I don't know about myself? So there'll be thoughts and observations from your experience about me, which you're not telling me, but I have no idea about. And that's going to be a factor in what goes on, because I'm unaware of, you know, your views, your judgments, your perceptions of me. And then of course there's another quadrant, which is what I don't know about myself and what others don't know about me, the kind of unconscious world that is going on. And what's really important is that we expand the unknown about ourselves, that we become more revealing, firstly, that I reveal more of myself, because if I reveal more of myself to you, I'm going to be more authentic in my interactions with you. And by the way, in terms of reciprocity, so you're going to be more authentic with me too. And so that can really encourage the depth of a relationship. And if I encourage you to give me feedback, I can also begin to expand my knowledge of myself from your perspective. And then we can look at the final window and think, well, if I can just deepen my awareness overall of myself, then that helps me to develop And this is about real authenticity and about the depth of self-knowledge.
So is this how you introduce the Jahari window in a group dynamic, presenting the very idea and the invite to give and receive feedback? Is feedback the tool you use to leverage a Jahari window in group dynamics?
Yes. And introducing this model so that we can begin to explore what is unexpressed here, and particularly what are the stuff that's going on under the waterline that we might not be sharing with each other, because this works for teams as much as it does for individuals, as much as it does for whole organizations. And you just mentioned one thing, and that's feedback. For me, feedback in inter-team relationships is really important. And feedback, when we do ask for feedback on work or on ourselves or on our team, two things happen. One is inevitably the person asking for feedback tenses up slightly. I'm going to hear something uncomfortable about myself. The other thing is that the person who's on the spot that has to give feedback gets slightly tense. Oh, I'm on the spot, I've got to give feedback. And when we get tense, we go to the slightly negative, the more critical. It's much easier to be critical than it is anything else, or to avoid critical and go to the other extreme and just be super glossy. Neither of those are really useful. And also feedback is like looking in the rear view mirror, right, the whole time. And who wants to drive looking in the rear view mirror? That's not very handy. Right?
Very true.
So feed forward is a much better model for introducing the notion of, well, what do I do next? Or where do we go next with this piece of work? And feed forward is about inviting a more positive framework, and so that there is a real direction of travel going forward. And it has 4 particular questions about it. What inspires or excites you or me about a piece of work, about an engagement on a project, about a service, about a team, about an individual? What excites? And if there is nothing, you just don't put anything. And then the next one down is, and I say down as though this is a list, and I do this as a list, and you can type this up and then circulate it or whatever you want to do with it and use it as notes. And then what works or is just okay, or if it's a brief, for a building project or an advertising campaign or whatever, or a service, what's just worked, because then you know what to continue to do, right? Okay, it's worked. Wasn't exciting, but it delivered on the brief. Okay, so that's acknowledgement. And then the next is, what was missing about this? What was missing about this service, brief, or whatever? And then it becomes easy to list, oh, you didn't do that, or you didn't do that, or whatever it is. Now we've got a real checklist, because we can say, okay, the next iteration has to have those things in. But it might be, and what's inspired is something that we really want to build on, by the way. What we're going to. So, I mean, it begins to work as a very positive structure. And then finally, what would make this idea, project, person, in terms of their contributions, bigger and better? And now there's an opportunity to sort of lay again a bit more of the groundwork for, well, looking forward, what is it that we can do? That then gives you a template for really effective moving into the next iteration, the future of anything together. And that structure takes the tension away from the person or the team that have to give feedback, and it takes the tension away from the listener so that they can fully listen and probe what's going on. And that is a very elegant way of improvement within teams, within individuals, and within service organizations. I commend it to everybody.
It's very elegant. I love it. Feed forward rather than feed
forward
back.
Don't look in the rearview mirror. Look forward through the view screen.
Paul, how are team relationships changing in this new normal we are living today and the next normal we are likely to experience from now on?
Team relationships are really challenged, and we all know that. Just from an individual point of view, our relationships become more transactional.
I had the impression you're not a big fan of virtual meetings.
Well, I think one of the great things about virtual, just to deal with this, one of the great things about virtual meetings is I don't have jet lag anymore. Right?
Yeah, that helps.
Whether my wife is so happy to see me around the house, having complained all her life about me traveling, I don't. But I'm certainly enjoying not traveling. It saves a lot of time. and money and energy. On the other hand, it is way more demanding. And it's more demanding because this interface that we're using is not how we communicate face to face. So if we think about normally sitting in a meeting room, 55% or thereabouts of communication is about body language. You can't see my hand moving at the moment. For those listeners, we're on Zoom, and the picture frame is so that I can only see Carlo's upper body. He can only see my upper body. We can't see the emphasis that we're putting that is so important on words, on ideas, and how they might be landing with us. And so immediately that human communication that we have learned through the evolution of human beings is 55% gone. And now we're down to the rest. And 38% or thereabouts is about tone of voice, about intonation, about the speed of delivery. Well, now we have another problem, which is even though Carlo and I are using good microphones and trying to get the best quality, unfortunately, the way the signal is sent out means that we're missing an awful lot of the dynamic wave of tonal quality, of emphasis, and with buffering going on, we're not even getting this in real time. So the smoothness with which we hear each other is immediately interrupted. And now we're down to, the 5% of the words themselves. And words are so ambiguous, as we talked about with clean language and other aspects so far, they can't be relied upon, and yet we're trying to magnify them. Oh, and the other thing, of course, by the way, sorry, I should have said, Carlo is just smiling, is that it becomes more difficult to decode the facial elements that are going on with somebody else. I notice I'm quite small on the screen, so Carlo can't really see the detail of my face. Yeah. If we're face to face, the micro movements that we unconsciously observe and respond to, and also give us cues along with the pace of language about when to interrupt, when to build on a point or whatever it is, we're missing those. So all of this is a very long way of saying the workload goes up when we're trying to communicate with other people. And we have, relationships with individuals, not pictures on a screen in normal time. And yet we're little postcard pictures. And so working relationships, which are really underpinned by communication, become face-to-face communication often, are much more arduous as a result. And so relationships, the very notion of problem B, how we're getting on together, becomes a lot more functional. And we become a lot more tired. Oh, by the way, there's one other factor. We speak 15% more loudly generally. So at the end of the day, we're a lot more tired, having to try and listen to what the other person, decode what the other person is saying. And we're trying to kind of shout unconsciously over the distance. So we're much more tired. We're much less receptive to our colleagues. And now we're also stuck in the same place. Rather than the rejuvenation of getting up and having a chat to somebody around the coffee bar or going to a lunch or having a water around the soda fountain, the water cooler, whatever it is, all of those things which are so human to us adversely affect our teamwork. So teams become more and more stretched. They become more and more transactional and more distance. So there are enormous downsides. What we have in the future, who knows? Because we're all inventing the future every day in every different country at a different rate. So we will find out, but inevitably, as everybody says, there's going to be a different balance. What that balance is will be a balance between what is, I think, an effective balance of our energy and return about commuting or traveling to different clients or colleagues, and the need for human contact and effective communication, which can only come about when we're face to face. And I do say only come about.
I agree with you. I also think that the energy and the commitment that it takes to travel and go and see somebody speaks loudly about the intention, something that's you don't achieve with a virtual meeting. And also the fact that the minute we are done, we switch off and we go back to our previous life just doesn't create that extra layer of commitment, immersion, call it as you like, but it's lost.
Exactly. It is. And for me, connecting with my team, I want to be in that room. Connecting with my clients, I want to be in that room. And the other thing is the physicality of touch, of whether it's a touch on an arm or a handshake or an embrace. These are powerful emotional triggers that say we are on the same side. We are together. We are one human with another human. And without that, we just become these pictures on a screen, and therefore we're distanced.
They are gone for some times, I'm afraid. Oh, Paul, there's so much more in your book that I'd love to discuss with you. And also this conversation is very pleasant and inspiring as far as I'm concerned. So let me ask you two last questions. The first one is specific. I did really enjoy reading about the ego states you refer to in the book. So the parent ego state, the adult ego state, and the child ego state. I think it's a beautiful template to analyze one own's thoughts and behaviors and the people around us. So that's my first specific question. And the second one, I anticipated, but I will ask it again, is what did I miss? What needs to be addressed, communicated, spread before I say grazie mille for this conversation?
Okay, I'm looking in that last question, and I'll think about that as I answer the first question.
Okay.
So ego states, these are fascinating. I mean, just fascinating. Eric Byrne was a very bright therapist. He came from an analyst background in the 1960s, and he began to develop a concept from working with his clients that at any one waking moment, they and all of us are in one of three, as he described it, states of being, whether we're walking down the street or meeting our neighbors or getting up out of bed or anything at all. And he described these as parent, adult, child. And they're very distinct. And if I just very briefly describe the parental ego state, and it comes in two forms, the nurturing parent and the critical or controlling parent, and I'm aware of myself as being a parent as well, that, as the nurturing parent, I might have said to my kids, hey, well done, babes, for doing that. That's fantastic. You won the race. And today, when we're back in the office or even by email these days, I will say to a colleague, hey, well done. That was fantastic. And you can hear that kind of nurturing tone in my voice. And I'm clearly, acting in some kind of superior looking down way, in a very benign way, as though I want to be really supportive and encouraging, as a parent does. And then the critical or controlling parent, with my own kids, if I said to them, for God's sakes, I've told you 5 times, don't do that. That is me as a parent. I'm using these examples just to bring it to life a bit more. And today, if somebody makes a mistake in the office, and if I just for one moment don't pause and I get super critical, I might say, how many times do we have to tell you to do this? By the way, that is an exaggeration. I think I actually say that, but to give you a kind of idea of that critical or controlling, or don't ever do that again. So that's the parental ego state. Now the child ego state. Oh, by the way, a parental ego state, this is how what we took on board from our own parents or guardians. It kind of introjected at a very early age. I had a great couple that came to see me, and 2 guys, and it was brilliant. And one of them said to his partner, when we're driving out together and you're backseat driving, I feel like it's your dad in the car beside me. And it was exactly that. It was his dad criticizing the driving, just as his dad would have done. So it's that kind of deep rootedness. Often so there's introjection. Now, anyway, let's go down to the child ego state. The child ego state is, comes in 2 forms, like the parental ego state, and there's the free child. And the free child, when I was a kid, I used to run along the long grass near where we lived by the seaside, and the grass came up, up to my waist, and I would just pull out my arms and pretend to be an airplane. Whee! I'd be running around pretending to be an airplane, my arms out, not a care in the world. And the same is true when I'm being creative today, or if I walk into a creative environment and people are having ideas. These are liberated ideas without constraint. People are imagining. They are free from restrictions. And here is the free child. And you need to be in that state to be able to do that kind of thing, and often people with a critical voice in their head will often have a glass of wine and suddenly become liberated, So to be into the free child. Alongside the free child is the adapted child, can be slightly rebellious child. And I'm using a simple model here. And here is where I've just been told off, by my parents or by my teachers. And I can still feel that today, that same experience. I can feel ashamed. When we made a terrible error with a client and the client called, I just left the client's offices and the chief operating officer called and said, this has happened. And I actually blushed and felt ashamed, and I had to go back. And I felt really awkward about that. I was in this adapted child state. I felt corrected. I felt wrong. And it can happen to any one of us. And I was, in that position of feeling powerless and just saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So those are the two levels of ego states that have an emotional content about them, the parent and the child. In the middle, the adult. The adult here has no emotional content. We can name the time and we can name what's happening. And right now I can see that Carlo has some headphones on, he has a microphone in front of him, and he can see that behind me there's a picture on the wall and there's a sofa. And we can also look at our watches, compare the time, and we can agree exactly what the time is. These are all facts. There is nothing to be said about these in terms of emotional content. Now, how this plays out in teams and of course in couples as well, is that particularly if you can imagine a position where, a team for any business is maybe presenting for a major contract from another team. And often the CEO or whoever is the senior person will maybe stand up and do an intro presentation, and other members of the team will present their parts. Now, if any one moment in that presentation, they are just overemphasizing or slightly exaggerating a point from a point of view of nervousness, the adapted child, in other words. If they're too much in the supplicant mode, too ready to please, too ready to kind of bend to the client's wishes, too ready to make it right, to somehow change what they've got, to ameliorate any particular concerns, they automatically are in the supplicant mode of, please give us your business. It's almost like they're on their knees metaphorically. This is so important. We really do want your business. Yeah, I get that. But actually, if they go a little bit further, there's a bit of anxiety there. They're in the adapted child ego state of, we want your business. And that only gives the client team one place to respond from, and that is the critical or controlling parent. It automatically triggers their critical reaction or their controlling reaction. And so they're more likely to say, well, these are really great recommendations, however, or, thank you very much, but, and here are the problems. It will trigger their mind to the problems of being, and it will be because it's the critical parent that is now cutting in. And if whoever is presenting takes on board that feedback and goes back again, they're more likely to say, well, we've done our best in the time that's been available. And that very supplicant mode will trigger off again a critical response. We can see this happening as then becomes an embedded system between suppliers and clients, or advisors and their clients, and we can also see it happening within couples. Anyway, so we're all in one of these ego states, and the important thing here is to work out, well, where do I normally default to? I notice I go a lot to free child, so I can be slightly rebellious and entertaining and want to make people laugh, and I can be in nurturing parent quite a lot. I'm not very good on critical parent. I say not very good. It's not a place I go to a lot. And getting really balanced about this is important, so that we're fully aware of how we are affecting other people as much as the ego state that we're in. And it gives us a greater amount of control.
So it's important to be balanced. There's not a better state. There's a state that works in a particular situation, and that's the state you want to be in. Am I correct?
You're absolutely correct. Thank you. There is no better, there is no worse, but having more choicefulness about this and awareness is really important. And using this with your team as well, so that you're able to help them to improve the way that they come across and the way they contribute is fundamentally important. So your final question.
My final question.
Before you say grazie mille, what's the one thing that
needs to be said?
That needs to be said. the one thing that needs to be said is that in all relationships, and I'm going to repeat this again, there's problem A and problem B. Please, everybody, pay attention to problem B at least 10% of your day, every day.
Paul Cowan, grazie mille for being on Lux and Tech.
Grazie mille for having me. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
If you enjoy this content, remember to subscribe to our podcast so you won't miss any of our weekly interviews with world's experts in the fields that are shaping the world we live in. You can also help us grow the podcast by sharing it with the people who need to hear it and by leaving a positive comment on the platform you use. I truly appreciate it. See you next week.